Welcome back into the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI. Mizzou football reporters Joey Van Zummeren and Michael Stamps here today to take a look ahead to this Mizzou 2025 football schedule as Greg Sankey and all the talking heads are down there in Destin, Florida, figuring out next year's schedule. We're taking a look at this year's schedule for Missouri and all the opponents they have on it. Last year, around this time, a lot of people were pointing to Missouri's schedule and saying it was a very easy SEC schedule. Now, with the developments of how things went last year, I think you look at the schedule and there's quite a few interesting matchups on there, and certainly not an easy one by any means. So excited to talk about it today. We're going to take a look at some of the top moves and losses in the transfer portal for these teams, as well as their head coach situation, the record last year, all that good stuff for how this Tigers schedule is looking like for 2025. Michael, before we get into it, any general thoughts on how this opponent list is shaking up for Missouri?
I guess the one thing that I'm really the most intrigued by, especially in the SEC side of things, is the quarterbacks for each of those teams, because a lot of these teams have new quarterbacks this year, either from the transfer portal or I don't think there are any freshmen, but there could be. It could be a true freshman, or maybe someone was injured last year and didn't get to play a lot. So the quarterback crop of the teams that Missouri is going to be playing this season, for the most part, is pretty different compared to what it was last season. I mean, of what I can think of, I know South Carolina, Lenora Sellers will be back. Texas A&M, Marcel Reed, who I if I believe correctly, he only played a little bit when Missouri played them. It was Connor Wiegman doing most of that stuff. I don't remember who played. I think for Mississippi State, it was Michael Van Buren, who's out. So there's a lot of new faces at the quarterback position for each of these teams, which I think will be really interesting to see how that goes. But other than that, I mean, we got to nerd out a little bit and dive into some of these transfer portal classes. So it should be pretty exciting. The SEC reloaded. There's so much talent on all these teams, even for quote unquote the bottom teams like a Vanderbilt, like a Mississippi State. So plenty of fun players that we're gonna look into here, and I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, and as we'll talk about this a little bit as well, it's just so difficult to predict year to year what each team will look like. As Mizzou's historian Tom Orff pointed out on Twitter, there's somebody pointing to strength of schedule rankings, looking at those in May. It's like, man, we have no clue what these teams will look like. I mean, for one, come August, but even more importantly, come October and November when they're going into playing these SEC teams, not only because of just the general how teams change from year to year, but even more so with the transfer portal. Obviously, some of these are completely different teams. And I think more importantly, before we take a look at like questioning and try to analyze, Mizzou has a easy schedule or they have a difficult schedule. We have no idea what this Mizzou team is really going to look like. So I think it's going to be an interesting early season because of that. Which leads into a question I wanted to start off with of what can we really learn in these non-conference games against non-Power 4 teams, against Central Arkansas to start the season, Louisiana, and then hosting UMass? Because I think last year, by the time we got to the Boston College game, I think there was an idea that, okay, Missouri, they're probably going to start playing better at some point, but even from that game against Buffalo in week 2, there was some concerning signs that in hindsight, seeing how that 2024 season went, was a little bit of writing on the wall. Not that we knew, like it's not like they showed all of their flaws in that Buffalo game. And obviously everything you take from that game is in a grain of salt. And they won 38-0 in that game against Buffalo. But when you look at that first half, there was some things that were like, man, they can't do this against Buffalo. And kind of those same things continued on throughout the season. I especially think of the first 2 drives of that game offensively against Buffalo in week 2, where on one of them they get an interception, and they can't move the ball like 10 yards after that. They have to settle for long field goals on both the first 2 drives, and Blake Craig misses one of them. And I think it was, of course, between 40 and 49 yards, as would make sense for Blake Craig. And so there were some things in there, especially on the offense, in the red zone as well, in those first 3 games, where it said a little bit about the Mizzou team, and it's difficult to predict exactly what you can learn, and what we'll learn, and what questions we should have going into those games. But I do think there is, you shouldn't go and look at every snap from the all 22 for those games, especially in the second half. But there is still some things to garner from there. I mean, do you agree with that, Michael? And what do you think we can gain from these games?
Well, I mean, if you really think about it, we don't know what this team looks like at all because so many cornerstones from last year are gone. So you can make the argument that Central Arkansas is going to be one of the more important games of the season just for them to establish an identity. Because I don't know what to expect. I don't know if you think you know what to expect, but there's going to be a lot of people who don't know what's going on. So it's going to be a brand new team that comes out there against Central Arkansas. And obviously, I mean, knock on wood, you'd hope they're going to win that game and handle business despite any potential struggles that come their way. But that's going to be their way of establishing an identity right away, and showing people that what they're capable of. But I mean, those games are on the schedule to be wins. So that's the first thing. You learn how to win games, right? And that's good team building and things like that, especially when you make mistakes and it's a game you're supposed to win. You can kind of figure out how to get around those curves. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm sure they know what their identity is right now. But obviously we don't. So it's gonna be their moment to kind of establish that and show everybody what type of team they're gonna be. So I would say that's the point. Like I said, those are games you're supposed to win, but just showing people what they're capable of doing, and also what they need to improve on. Obviously, like you said, Buffalo was nowhere near perfect at all. So, that's going to be their opportunity to kind of show people that what they're made of, but these are going to be maybe some of the flaws as well that we're going to have to work on right away.
Yeah, another thing with that too that we should bring up is the Middle Tennessee game from 2 years ago, and I think that game more so served as a wake up call for that team because in the next week they go and beat Kansas State. So I think you can gain that from it as well. And what you said about, I mean, finding their identity, they might have an idea of what they want their identity to look like, but actually playing it on the field and see how it works. So I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of throw a lot at the wall in those early weeks. I mean, I mean, really, I guess just week one, because the next week you have to play Kansas. But we'll have to see. It'd be interesting. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of competition, so maybe we'll figure out in week one. I'm not a fan of quarterback competitions that stretch past week one, though.
Yeah, and I was going to say that too, not just the quarterback position specifically, but there's so many positional uncertainties and battles, if you want to call them that, or just questions in general of who's gonna start or how is the time going to be divvied up. So that's also important for, especially week one. I mean, Kansas is not going to be, it shouldn't be a walk in the park. I mean, they're going to be better than Central Arkansas and UMass and Louisiana, you would hope. So, you'd like to have as many of those questions, I guess, solved. So maybe I'm backtracking a little bit because that's an important game against a good team that you don't really want to lose. I mean, obviously the rivalry aspect, you don't want to lose the game for that reason. But if this is a team with playoff aspirations or, whatever that looks like, that's not a game you want to drop. So I guess maybe that process might be slightly expedited if that's a game they really want to win. I guess I didn't really think about that before my last answer, but that's kind of interesting to think about too. That is really an important game. Obviously, Central Arkansas, you're kind of establishing yourself, but Kansas is a good team that would, I mean, boost their resume, maybe.
I mean, you get a power forward early in the
Yeah,
season.
there's some name value there, so that'll be
Yeah.
interesting to think about as well.
Yeah, and I mean, just like Kansas game, I'm sure. I mean, moving the first game of the season to a Thursday has just become like an automatic decision for this program now. But having to have a few extra days to prepare for that Kansas game, I'm sure is something they've already been thinking of. Eli Drinkwitz just mentioned it a few weeks ago, matter of fact. So they'll have that on the docket. I mean, just we'll talk about that game more as we get closer, obviously. But I mean, the stakes are going to be high for that one, just at least within the fan base and program, for how long it's been since they played Kansas, and just where both programs are at right now, and kind of be a I think a loss would mean a lot more for Missouri than a win would, but to establish the right direction for the season. So let's get into opponent by opponent here. Starting off with Central Arkansas, they went 6-6 last year. The head coach is Nathan Brown. He was like 31 when he became the head coach. He's been there since 2018. Um, the one transfer I'd stick out to me is Luther Rickison, junior coming over from Middle Tennessee State as quarterback. Is he expected to be the starter, Michael?
Could not tell you. Really,
Okay.
it's hard. It's hard to tell. Yeah, it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
There's just not really a ton on any.
Not a lot of reporting.
Yeah, no, not a ton on any of the quarterbacks on the roster. I mean, I guess you could make that assumption. You know, he has some FBS experience. I guess he didn't really. I don't think he played. But you know, he has the experience in FBS system. I guess, and practice and things like that. So he's coming from a bigger name school. So I guess you'd expect that, but
yeah,
not too
the
sure.
one thing I would say, if he does end up being the starter, is just as we were talking about of what can you actually gain from these games. I was impressed. He's like 225 pounds, but looking at his high school tape, at least he seemed to be a little bit mobile. So like I know last year Mizzou started the season with like 5 or 6 straight mobile quarterbacks, so that's at least something you can gain from this experience.
Yeah, I mean, outside of that though, I don't really know if there's a ton. I mean, when I was looking through all this transfer portal research, I was just using 24/7 Sports and whatever resources I could find, and I don't know if they only brought in 6 or 7 transfers. I don't know if that's the case, or maybe they added more and they're just not recorded anywhere. But that doesn't really seem like that many. I mean, I don't know. I had a hard time finding who was leaving as well compared to who was coming in. So it was kind of hard to track. But I think for programs like Central Arkansas, who are FCS schools and not a ton of not a ton of tradition or history or things like that, bringing in players who previously started at Power 5 schools or FBS schools is a really good way to go, especially like I've got Cameron Bibby, who was a freshman receiver at Arkansas. I believe he was a walk-on. Mari Smith was a receiver at Tulsa. He's a former 3-star recruit. Like those guys have some sort of pedigree and might be able to work their way up the Central Arkansas roster. So those sort of things are good, but not surprisingly, there really wasn't much to pick up on for what Central Arkansas was doing in the transfer portal.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Of just it's difficult to prepare for these games and know what to game plan against. But obviously, I mean, it is interesting for these smaller schools to obviously the downside of the transfer portal for them is just the fact that anytime you have a player who is surprisingly good or better than he was thought to be as a high school prospect, he's obviously leaving immediately after the season. But you do get a little bit more of a funneling down from those bigger schools from their guys who can't crack playing time. And I mean, just also like I would assume it's a little bit more difficult for those guys to get playing time at those bigger schools now that they're bringing guys up. It's kind of a domino effect there.
A little bit off topic. Yeah, little bit off topic, but I'm so excited for the media discourse leading up to Central Arkansas, because if you remember the Murray State game, it was all, oh, there's no tape. We don't know what they're going to look like. And I have a gut feeling that it's going to be the exact same thing, maybe worse. So that'll be maybe that'll be a little bit entertaining, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see what Drinkwitz has to say there. That the opening game press conference is interesting because we've like talked to him a few times in fall camp, and then he has to. Then we have to find something else to talk about a team we don't know that much about. Moving on to this game against Kansas, they're holding on to Coach Lance Leopold. They went 5-7 last season, a downturn from their 2023 year. Will look like things were on the up and up. In the transfer portal, the thing that Mizzou Twitter has obviously been really happy about is Deshaun Warner, who was the highest rated commit in program history. an edge rusher, a 4-star edge rusher transferring to SMU after one season. So him and Ja'Kai Lane will be having fun down there. And then they're also losing Devin Neal, their running back, who was a 1,000-yard rusher for them last year. He was drafted to the NFL. But they do have Jalen Daniels returning for this upcoming season. He is another mobile quarterback. Outside of that, what can you tell us about where Kansas is at and the moves they made in the transfer portal, Michael?
Yeah, it seems like there was definitely an effort to, reload in the receiver room a little bit. I remember the name Quentin Skinner. He didn't get drafted, but I believe he was their leading receiver, and he signed somewhere as an undrafted free agent this year. So that was a talented player. Brought in former 4-star wide receiver Emmanuel Henderson, from Alabama. Really good return guy. He's bigger, has good speed. Most of his work at Alabama was as a return man, so that'll be good versatility there. Also brought in Bryson Canty from Columbia, had 760 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns last season as well. So another productive guy. Albany wide receiver Levi Wentz was another one of those guys as well. So 3 wide receivers there is a decent amount, and I would imagine most of those guys are going to make an impact of some sort right away. Then a couple other guys I just wanted to touch on. LaShawn Williams from Iowa didn't have a very productive season last year. Caleb Jackson was Caleb Jackson, and he's now an NFL running back, so kind of hard to fault him there. And he transferred in the middle of the season, I want to say, so kind of interesting there. But he's headed to Kansas. I would imagine he's going to be either the starter or contending for that starting spot. Bangali Kamara is another guy who transferred in the middle of the season. He's from South Carolina. Again, it's weird, but he has plenty of production under his belt. 54 tackles in 2023 and 47 in 2022. So another productive guy. And there's a long list of guys. Alabama cornerback Jaleel Hurley is a former 4-star. That's a guy that Missouri, I think, took a look at for a little bit, but passed on him. Oklahoma State safety Lyric Rawls, Texas defensive end Justice Finkley. Plenty of talented players. Again, Kansas is a school that can pull from, I think, some of those higher rated programs, get some of those freshmen like Hurley, like Henderson, or highly rated recruits that didn't get to play right away. They're looking for a quicker route to playing time. I think Kansas is one of those schools that can tend to land some of those guys. So I think Henderson and Hurley are going to be fun impact players, obviously coming from Alabama. That's going to get fans excited right away.
Do you have any thoughts on whether Kansas, it seems like a far stretch to go from the season they had in 2024 to have another one like they did in 23, but do you think right around 500 is where they're going to stay this year, or kind of any growth from that?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty similar. Jalen Daniels is actually a very, very good quarterback, and I believe he was hurt a little bit. I think he was hurt last year, for at least a stretch of time. But he's just never really had the right weapons around him. Receivers, tight ends, offensive line. Obviously, he had Devin Neal, but there's only so much he can do for Jalen Daniels. So he's a talented quarterback. He just hasn't really had the weapons. Emmanuel Henderson, like, he has return experience, not a ton of receiving experience, right? 4 receptions, 82 yards, and a touchdown in 2024. So just, potential, but not experience. Bryson Canty is productive at the FCS level. So it's like, I just don't think the weapons around him. And obviously he's the face of the team. He's probably one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12, but I just don't think he has the weapons around him for them to go super far. And the defense just kind of feels like it's the exact same to me as it was last season, or pretty similar. No really major upgrades. Like, I go back to Jaleel Hurley, who is a good player and was a high-rated recruit, but he's still developing. He's still, a high potential guy, and he struggled when he was on the field for a little bit last year. So, I would say around 500 is the same. And another thing I find interesting with Kansas is it seems like Lance Leipold, who is a very good head coach, by the way, it seems like he's been thrown around in so many head coaching job considerations over the last, 3 seasons probably. So I respect him for staying. It'll be interesting to see what happens this year if it's another, average season. So just throwing that out there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting just looking at the guys you mentioned here. I think even within the Power Four, like the upper tier schools that are good at recruiting in the transfer portal, being able to go with production over potential is a luxury compared to a school like Kansas that more so is going with potential over production, more so unfilled production for those guys that were higher rated out of high school. And so, I mean, I think it'll be interesting to, as we every year we get through the transfer portal being a thing in college football of how much development actually goes on with those guys and how much return on investment, how much better of an investment can they get on those guys with good coaching. Next up, back to another smaller school in Louisiana, coming to town on September 13th. Their coach is Michael DeSarmo. His name actually ends with EAUX, so very fitting to be the coach of Louisiana. He's gone 23-18 in his career since 2022. They actually went 10-4 last year, and their quarterback, I would assume to be their starter, Walker Howard, coming over from Ole Miss, who was actually really highly rated coming out of high school in 2022. What can you tell us about Howard and some of the other additions they made, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, this is another team that didn't add a ton of players in the transfer portal, but there's three guys that I want to hit on, and Howard's one of them. He's a former 4-star recruit, was the 40th ranked recruit in the class of 2022. So he started at LSU, made the move to Ole Miss right after, and then now he's here. Just hasn't been able to crack the rotation at any of those schools or get significant playing time at any of those schools, which makes sense. I mean, he's behind some pretty incredible quarterbacks, so no one's faulting him for that, but should be a talented player. He's going to have freedom. He's finally going to have the opportunity. I would say he hasn't had the opportunity to earn the role yet. So if he doesn't, that would probably be a concern for, his career. I would imagine he does, and he's going to finally have some freedom to operate an offense. So that's exciting. Coming over with him was former 4-star receiver Shelton Sampson, which is another interesting one. So I would imagine that's going to be some sort of dynamic, hopefully a duo, for Louisiana's sake, because that would be a pretty exciting thing to bring over to not just, mid-tier 4-stars. Those are both former top 100 prospects, which doesn't, that always doesn't fall into your lap. And I believe they overlapped at LSU. Shelton Sampson started his career at LSU. Just didn't do anything at all in those 2 seasons, like anything at all, not a single recorded stat, an appearance or two. So another talented player. He's a bigger receiver, which is fun, but he was a 78th ranked player in the class of 2023. And then the last guy I wanted to throw out was, this is a fun name, by the way. So many fun names that we're going to talk about today. I'm so excited. Curly Reed III. He's a former 4-star cornerback in the class of 2023 from Washington. Again, just didn't play all that much. Didn't play at all. But another guy who has that 4-star pedigree, 4-star ranking. Obviously, things come along with that production in high school. Some hint of athleticism. You're not ranked that high if you're not. So those are 3 pretty high-profile additions. We talked about it with Central Arkansas a little bit. That bringing in some of those guys with less experience from the Power 5 level can be impactful. This is like that on a whole nother level. I mean, bringing in 3 former 4-star recruits, if you can get them to stay for the rest of their career, those could be program-changing players, assuming they don't leave, which I guess if they play well, that's probably likely. But still, at least for one season, you have to hope that you can keep them around for a season or two, let them develop, and that's pretty impressive stuff to be bringing in players like that.
Yeah, and I mean, with Howard, I mean, like you mentioned, he sits behind Jaden Daniels for 1 year and then Jackson Dart the next. So difficult to. It's pretty easy to see why I couldn't see the field, and see how he does in Louisiana. Now on to the SEC, hosting South Carolina to begin the SEC schedule on September 20th. Let's talk about South Carolina in general. First off, I mean, they're bringing back Lenora Sellers, who is already being talked about as possible NFL draft prospect. Very, very talented quarterback. Lenora Sellers has had a good game against Missouri last year, obviously. They're losing Raheem Rocket Sanders and bringing in Rashul Faison to replace him. I'll talk about Faison in a second here. But before we get into that, Michael, I mean, what do you think about where South Carolina is at right now? Because they obviously really surprised a lot of people last year, made a really close bid for the college football playoff. I mean, obviously they had a few other teams helping them out in that, but I mean, just do you think Shane Beamer has built something sustainable?
You know what? I think he has, and I was going through each team and trying to see, okay, who's someone who could break out for next season. Um, this team has they played so many freshmen last year, whether they were true freshmen or redshirt freshmen. They played so many freshmen, and so many of the starters, especially on the offense, are returning sophomores or redshirt sophomores, which I think is really important. That they're still young, so they have room to grow, but they have a year or two of experience under the belt already. And you look at so many of the impactful players on this team, like Lenora Sellers, who I'm sure we'll talk about here in a second. Mazio Bennett was a true freshman last year. Josiah Thompson was a true freshman last year. Dylan Stewart, incredible pass rusher. They have so many young, impactful players that are gonna should be around for I guess the true sophomores will be around for another season, maybe more. The red shirts, I guess, can go this year if they want, but so many young, impactful players that are going to be expected to make jumps, especially Sellers. I mean, he's not only being thrown around in NFL draft pick conversations, but he's being thrown around for that top overall pick, which is way too early to tell, obviously. But you know, that's for a reason. He had glimpses of being absolutely incredible last year. So I think he has. I think this is probably his best. I don't want to say that because I don't know enough about past Shane Beamer teams, but this is a really darn good team, and the talent is through the roof. This is going to be a hard matchup for Missouri and anyone.
Right, and kind of off topic from, I mean, just where South Carolina is as a team, but I think a lot of the discussion around Mizzou's schedule for this upcoming season, because it is the same opponents from last year, just flipped locations, has been the fact that all three of their losses came on the road last year, and so they're avoiding having to go to those places. And so, for as much as I said at the top of, it's hard to predict what a team is going to look like from year to year. I think just looking at the places they have to avoid playing separate from where the team is actually at, I think not having to go to play at Texas A&M, South Carolina, and Alabama, three very difficult places to play. It's not like Auburn and Oklahoma are easy places to play either, but to not have to go to play those places is pretty significant. Agree of what you said about Sellers and this being probably Shane Beamer's most talented team with the Gamecocks. With Faison to replace Raheem Sanders, it's interesting. I was looking at Rashul's Utah State tape, and like he's really tiny. Like he looked like a wide receiver out there running. Is right around 5'11", but Utah State had him measuring in at 200, and now South Carolina has him at 218. So a lot bigger. Honestly, I think he kind of just needed that to be in the SEC, and we'll see how that slows him down at all. But obviously, I mean, Rocket Sanders was, I mean, just massive like a bowling ball. So this is a little bit different pace. But what do you think about Faison and all the other additions South Carolina made?
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think Faison was a beneficiary of the JUCO ruling. I might be wrong there. I think he's getting an extra season. I'll let you do your research while I talk because I think that's correct, but I don't want to be wrong. But plenty of other talented players like the rest of the SEC. A couple that I wanted to highlight was Brandon Cisse, 4-star or cornerback from NC State. He's a true junior, has been productive in all of his time in his first 2 seasons with NC State. 28 tackles and 5 deflections last year, 10 tackles and a pick the year before that.
Yeah,
Uh,
Rashul, he started his career at JUCO level.
Okay, perfect. That's what I thought. I just didn't want to misspeak. Cisse allowed only 175 yards in coverage last year, so he was incredible. Going back to Faison, 1,100 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns last year. He's a heck of a player. Going to be one of the better running backs in the SEC. You would imagine. Other names that I'm taking a look at: Jalen Brown from Missouri. I don't know what I kind of threw his name in there just to do it because he's from Missouri. I don't know what his role looks like on this team next year. Obviously, he still has a ways to go development wise, and they have some pretty solid pass rushers. One of them, another Hall of Fame name, by the way. I think it's Demon Clowney or Damon Clowney. I believe he is a sibling of Jadavion. So he's been around the block plenty of times, multiple schools. I want to say like 4 or 5. Very experienced defensive end. Obviously, Dylan Stewart is there as well, but we'll go with Damon Clowney because I feel like Demon's a little intimidating. But Damon Clowney is another one of those guys. Jaylen Brown, I would be surprised if he's a big contributor next year, but obviously he has all the potential in the world. Gabriel Brownlow Dindy is another one. He's a former 5-star recruit. Came from Texas A&M. Hasn't really done much at Texas A&M, so he'll get the opportunity. More than likely to play right away with South Carolina, which will be good. One of the better players that I was scanning through and looking at grades and stuff was Western Kentucky guard Rodney Newsome. He should slot right in as their left guard, I believe. He's going to be a pretty talented player. Other names, they brought in Air Noland, Air Noland, another interesting name, plenty of them. Former 5-star quarterback, came from Ohio State. Obviously, he's not going to play right away, but very talented player. Alabama linebacker Justin Okoronkwo could be an immediate impact player. Kentucky tight end Jordan Dingle could be an impact player right away. I guess Campbell defensive end George Wilson could be another one. So I think South Carolina did a really good job of bringing in players who are productive and can make immediate impacts. Plenty of depth with the transfers they brought in too, which I think is always really important. Trying to find those people who will play different roles and wait their turn, because not all these guys are seniors or graduate seniors. Some of these guys have eligibility left. So a couple of these guys will probably see for more than 1 year. But I think South Carolina's transfer class was pretty darn good. It was the 8th best class in the SEC. So ratings maybe don't tell the whole story there, but definitely some talented players in there.
I feel like Shane Beamer in South Carolina's rise really is similar to Missouri's, just because a lot of people liked to make fun of Shane Beamer and in different ways than they did of Eli Drinkwitz. I think.
Yeah, I was going to say people definitely don't exactly love Shane Beamer.
Yes, absolutely. And at my first reporting job, I wrote a story on Shane Beamer breaking his foot because he kicked something in the locker room. So I'll always remember that. And then they built through the transfer portal really well, and obviously last year having a really good season to turn it around. An important update on Clowney. It's pronounced Damon, as in like similar to Damon Wilson, who his first name is often people pronounce it Damien, but it's Damon, not Demon for the Clowney. And he's the cousin of Jadeveon. So he went through this trip through some other SEC schools and now lands up back where his cousin established a good legacy. So that's that for South Carolina. Obviously, the big stars for that are still going to be Lenore Sellers and Dylan Stewart for this upcoming season. On to UMass. I just can't help but laugh every time I think of the frustration Mizzou fans had that they played a away game here and the hilarious clips that came out of it of Eli Drinkwitz like walking in what looked to be like a middle school parking lot off the bus. But this game's going to be at Pro Field. They brought in 34 transfers. They fired their head coach John Brown, going to Jack Rezmiak. Staying with the defense-minded coach, though. He's a former defense coordinator at Rutgers, a little bit younger than Don Brown, though. Still good experience behind his name. Michael, what can you tell us about this UMass team?
Not a lot. I think the best transfer they brought in was Joshua Nobles from Jackson State. He's a pass rusher. Recorded 50 tackles and 9 sacks last year, and then 13 tackles, and 2 sacks the year before. He was the second highest rated defensive player in the SWAC, the Southwestern Athletic Conference. So it is, a level below, but he is a talented, productive, proven player. He was the highest rated defensive player on Jackson State last year. That's the biggest one. They're bringing in Grant Jordan from Yale. He's a talented quarterback. 1,938 passing yards, 22 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. And the options thin out from they don't thin out from there because there was 34 players in that transfer portal class. It made my head hurt looking at all of them. But a lot of them were just kind of the same idea, not very proven at the Power 5 level or FCS and making the step down. One other guy that I thought was pretty solid, another fun name, Mike Entwistle, offensive guard from Harvard. good run blocker. Run blocker had a 74.9 run blocking grade, only allowed 2 sacks last year. Last shout out I'm doing is another great name. I'm sorry for this, Joey. Cookie Desiderio. He's a running back on the roster. He didn't really do much as a freshman last year, but looks like based on who's the personnel at running back this year could be slated for a increased role. So not only does he have an incredible name, I think there is a chance that he does take a step up in production. Running back spot will be interesting for them this year. But yeah, that's really all I have on UMass. They brought in a ton of players, but not a lot of them are ultra proven yet. So it'll be interesting to see how all those guys gel, especially with the new head coach. And they're an independent school, so I believe they're in an independent school. They might be moving conferences, but don't quote me on that. But they play an interesting schedule. It's, kind of all over the place. So it'll be interesting with that new head coach and 34 new transfers. That's a lot to handle in one season. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes, I guess. But definitely some pieces to work with.
Yeah, another team that will be difficult what to expect from. Cookie, when I saw his name in our script, I looked him up. He does not look like, you expect like a very like nice kind of smaller guy. But Cookie does not look like that. I'm not saying he's not nice, but looks like a very tough running back to tackle. Before we talk about this Alabama game, let's talk about just how the schedule is for these first 6 weeks here, because they're opening with 6 straight home games. After this UMass game, they get a bye week before facing Alabama. I think obviously the downside of 6 straight home games is just you have to, of course, and you have a heavy road schedule to end off the season. So, that's really it. I think can't complain too much about the bye placement. They have one after the Vanderbilt game 3 weeks later, so maybe you'd like a little bit later in the season, that second bye. But other than that, I don't think this is a really. I don't think there's too much you can pick apart about the schedule placement for anything on this from Mizzou.
No, just I kind of like the mid-season bye. I think that's perfect. I think that's perfect for them. But there are, I don't know if South Carolina will be a challenge, but other than that, no, not really many tough games on the schedule right away. So should be a good easy stretch. I don't like that many home games right away though.
Yeah.
It's good to get one in early, and that's even if it's a bad game. So that's not ideal, but other than that, no complaints from me.
Right. Yeah. We'll see how they deal with the road stuff, because I think last year it was obviously there was the narrative of, oh, they can't play on the road, but it's a little bit difficult to tell. I think there's definitely some way to it with the fact that they go to Texas A&M, get whooped, go to Alabama, same result, just look completely unprepared. And obviously the Brady Cook injury plays into that Alabama game, though. On to Alabama. Speaking of, interesting team heading into year 2 under Kalen DeBoer. Obviously, I think going into last year, it was like, all right, like no matter what Kalen DeBoer does, if it's not winning a national championship, people are going to be disappointed and say he's not Saban. And so that's exactly what's been happening over the past few weeks. Although him saying at the SEC meetings that he would like to see other teams have their schedule and see if they made the playoff, I don't think helped his case. But looking at this team, they had a quarterback competition in the spring. It looks like Ty Simpson, it's now his job to lose. He's a little bit of a gamer. Definitely not a pocket passer, I would say. He's pretty bold with it. Kind of mobile. He's not a burner with his speed for sure, but like he's not afraid to tuck it down either. A little bit slimmer. So any thoughts there on Ty Simpson, and then get into what they had in the transfer portal?
No, yeah, Simpson might have won the battle in the spring, but I would keep an eye on that like all season long. I think there's the two guys behind him, Austin Mack and Keelan Russell, especially Keelan Russell, are more than capable of taking that job from him. Keelan Russell is like eerily similar to Jalen Milroe, with maybe a little bit more precision on the arm and less power. But that'll be an interesting position to keep an eye on. Ty Simpson, shout out to Ty Simpson. He's been waiting his turn there for quite some time. and you would see a lot of those guys transfer out, but he stuck it out. So good for Ty Simpson. An interesting transfer portal class from Alabama in general, though. It's the 11th ranked one in the SEC, so maybe not the firepower that you would expect from a program like Alabama. And going down the list, and looking at some of the guys, it's kind of hard to pinpoint a ton of day one starters. I think that's because they were able to pull a lot of guys out of the NFL draft. A couple that come to mind, like Tim Keenan is a veteran defensive tackle. LT Overton is another guy. Deontay Lawson is another guy. Keon Sabb is another guy. So they were able to keep a lot of their players from going to the NFL, which I think makes a big difference. One of the better transfers, probably the best one of the class, is Miami receiver Isaiah Horton. He will slot in just fine with Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams. He's a bigger target. He's like 6'4" ish, not a big after the catch guy. So he will slot in well with Bernard, and however old Ryan Williams is, Ryan Williams. Cam Dewberry was an offensive guard prospect that Missouri was actually going after. He was a depth guy at Texas A&M and really doesn't have the grades on PFF or the numbers to back up, I guess being a starter right away at Alabama, in my opinion, but a high potential guy, former 4-star recruit, was kind of like a swing guard and a rotational guard for them. It might be a day one starter. Kind of looks like he will based on just experience levels, but that's another guy to keep an eye on. Like I said, Missouri was pretty involved with him, I believe, but ended up going to Alabama. A couple of names: Nakai Hill Green's a linebacker from Colorado, just a tackle machine, 82 tackles last season and 73 the year before with Charlotte. Cameron Calhoun's a sophomore cornerback, got 21 tackles and a pick last year. And then outside of that, it thins out a lot. Kelby Collins is a former 4-star recruit from Florida. He's a defensive end. They brought in 3 tight ends. Brody Dalton from Troy, Jackson Marco from West Virginia, and then Peter Knudsen, I believe. Jaden Hobson's a tackle from South Alabama. And then the list, beyond that just gets kind of thin. Like I said, they retained a lot of players and had a lot of young players play last year, so didn't have to rely as much on the transfer portal this year, which I guess isn't, a horrible thing. It's going to be pretty familiar territory with most of the Alabama roster from last year going into this year.
Yeah, be interesting to see how quick their offense meshes together. If they do stick around with Ty Simpson, especially for the whole season, I think to have a guy entering the starting position that has been in your program for a few years is a luxury for sure. They still have at least 2 more seasons of Ryan Williams unless he decides to transfer after this year. And yeah, like you said, Horton adds a bigger target compared to Williams, who is a little bit smaller. So be interesting to see how that gels. But obviously, I mean, the main thing that stopped Mizzou last year against Alabama was the defense. It didn't matter what the Alabama offense did. All they needed was a field goal to beat Mizzou in that game. Moving on to Auburn, playing them on October 18th. Auburn has always been an interesting team to me over the past few years because, again, they're recruiting well. They have the 4th best transfer portal class in the SEC, but haven't been able to really put it together. They had some good wins last year, though. Michael, do you think this is an Auburn team that can take a few steps forward with Jackson Arnold at the helm?
Man, that's an interesting question. I still don't know. I think the verdict's not in on Jackson Arnold. Another guy who had glimpses, didn't really get to do much his freshman year. Then last year was technically his first real year of action, and he wasn't horrible, but he obviously wasn't incredible. His game against Missouri was not thrilling at all, but that was an interesting one. So I don't know. I mean, the team will go as far as Jackson Arnold takes them. They brought in Ashton Daniels, quarterback from Stanford as well, but he's bounced around teams for forever, and he's more of just throw him into game to get some designed runs type of guy. So I don't think he's the answer. They also have a 5-star freshman sitting behind both of those guys, and Deuce Knight. So I mean, Jackson Arnold will probably has won this job, I'd imagine, and probably will maintain it unless things get really bad. Um, so I don't know. It'll be interesting to keep an eye on. That being said, his receiving core has to be one of the best in the SEC. Obviously, you return Cam Coleman, who was one of the best freshmen in the SEC and probably in the country, I would imagine. Malcolm Simmons as well was another incredible one. And then you have Perry Thompson, too, who's another former 5-star, all in the same class, which is just absurd. Those three are great and are going to continue to be great. You also bring in Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech, who was a 700-yard receiver last year, 3 touchdowns. Great yak guy. He's a impressive player, former freshman All-American. You also bring in Horatio Fields from Wake Forest, so another talented wide receiver. 4-star Samuel Turner flipped his commitment from Georgia Tech to Auburn, late in the recruiting cycle. So you have like 7 dudes there who could all make an impact. Someone's not going to like the fact that they're not getting targets, so that'll be something to evaluate later down the road. But he's going to have all the weapons in the world. Damari Alston, Jeremiah Cobb, and Darrell Robinson from UConn, a new transfer, are his running backs. And then they brought in a couple offensive linemen. Xavier Chaplin from Virginia Tech was one of the highest rated offensive tackles in the transfer portal this year. So that's an interesting one. And then there's Mason Murphy from USC as well. Chaplin should slide in on the left, Murphy on the right, assuming those guys end up as starters. So he has a good team around him. I mean, I know Oklahoma's receivers last year, especially by the time of the Missouri game, were really, really, really depleted, and that did not help his case at all. They were on fifth and sixth string guys, and some of those guys were even playing hurt. There were walk-ons. Like, it was a nightmare. So I guess in that sense, you feel for him. And Oklahoma's offensive line was also just bad. So that didn't really help his case. I'd like to think that it's an upgraded group in both of those things here at Auburn. So that'll be interesting to keep an eye on. And then on the defense, the only guy I really want to hit on, because most of the transfers are just going to be depth guys. But Miami, Ohio cornerback Rayon Strader was probably one of my favorite players in the transfer portal this year. 53 tackles and 2 interceptions last year, had a 77 coverage grade in 2024. And was the MAC cornerback of the year. So very talented guy. He's going to have a couple years of eligibility for them. Going to be a pretty impressive player there. I think he might not be an immediate starter. He, might swing around a little bit, but going to be a good player. They obviously brought in other guys as well, but I don't think any of them are going to make the immediate impact of the ones that I just listed.
Yeah, Jackson Arnold, last time when he played in Missouri last year, 15 of 24 for 74 yards against Missouri passing wise. I think in that game, it was pretty evident the 2 things you mentioned of the wide receiver injuries and then also the offensive line, as Zion Young would be able to tell you about the Oklahoma offensive line. Moving on to Vanderbilt on October 25th. Another really interesting team in the SEC heading into next season. They had the 14th best transfer class in the SEC, but they also returned a lot of production with 14 starters. Obviously, Diego Pavia went to the courts and got himself another year of eligibility, so he's back as well. A few of his favorite receiving options are back as well. So Michael, I mean, when you look at this transfer portal, I mean, really not as much a transfer portal class because there's not as many notable names, but just overall, do you think, I mean, I like Clark Lee. Do you think this is a team that can continue to build on what they did last year?
I don't know. There's so many rosters in the SEC that had this much more significant talent upgrades. I mean, in the transfer portal, they had to replace a lot of the offensive line, and they did that. I mean, Bryce Henderson from South Dakota actually had like a 94 run blocking grade last year, which is one of the higher ones I would think in the country. So that's impressive. Jordan White from Liberty, he's gonna probably slide in at left guard. Didn't allow a single sack last year. Another great player. But outside of that, I don't see any of the guys they brought in making insanely big impacts. On the defensive side of the ball, they didn't really have to replace much. There's going to be a lot of, I would imagine most of their defensive starters this season are going to be returners. A good chunk of them are. So I don't know. I mean, I guess in that sense, if they're bringing back the same team as last year, they're not really getting much worse. But I don't know if the window for or if the ceiling for getting much better, um, is that high. One name I just really wanted to throw out there, by the way, that I thought was really fun. I was looking for a breakout freshman, a breakout sophomore, excuse me. I guess a freshman. His name is Joseph McVeigh, and if you remember, he had his lone reception in during last season was a 65-yard touchdown against Missouri. Is that one deep ball? Just throwing that out there. That was a blast. He's a former 4-star recruit, so he has more than just that to his name. But fun little tidbit there. But yeah, I don't think I don't think the floor has changed really. But the ceiling can't be much higher, if not a little bit lower than what it was last year.
All right, yeah, I knew that name for a reason. That explains it all. Then after playing Vanderbilt, Missouri has a bye week over Halloween, which for the second straight year. So I'm sure a lot of Mizzou student body will be happy with that coincidence again. And then they play Texas A&M on November 8th. Texas A&M is always going to recruit like Texas A&M, sixth best transfer class in the SEC. Obviously, Missouri was terrorized by Texas A&M's pass rush last year, so they are losing Shamar Stewart and Nick Gordon there. And like you mentioned at the top, Marcel Reed is returning, but it was Connor who played against Missouri last year. But Missouri is presumably very familiar with Marcel Reed after presumably preparing to play him last year. Very mobile guy that has a lot of potential. It should be exciting to watch this year. Just what do you make of where Texas A&M is at right now?
I forgot about that whole ordeal. That was awesome, wasn't it? Yeah, it will be Marcel Reed as the starting quarterback. We can set that in stone now, unless he is injured. Not the most important move that they made, but if we're on the topic of quarterbacks, they brought in Jacob Zeno from UAB, who is a pretty well-seasoned quarterback, and he was a starter at UAB, but he's backed up at other Power 5 schools. So I really like that move, and he's going to be a mentor of sorts, I would imagine, to Marcel Reed. So fun move there, but they brought in probably the best receiver in the transfer portal, and Kevin Conception, another incredible name from NC State, very productive last year. Also brought in Mario Craver from Mississippi State. He was one of the better freshman receivers in the SEC last year. A guy that I really liked was Tyler Onyedim. He's a defensive tackle from Iowa State. He's a very experienced player, and he's huge as well. So that's going to be a fun one to keep an eye on. Julian Humphreys, a former 4-star quarterback from Georgia, another good one. They brought in so many tight ends, 3 tight ends in the transfer portal. I don't know why, but they did. So that happened. I'm going to give another shout out to Micah Riley because I went to middle school with him. That's pretty interesting fact. So shout out to Micah Riley. Good blocking tight end though, so I'm sure he can contribute there. Amari Niblack is the more exciting one from Texas. He's a former 4-star recruit and had some receiving promise there. So they brought in productive players, but this is another team where I think the returners are going to be the focal point of the offense and the defense. I mean, look at the running back room. You bring back Le'Veon Moss, Ruben Owens, EJ Smith, Amari Daniels. Those are all guys who were on the team last year. Receiving wise, Terry Busey is a good returner. The offensive line is going to be, solely returners. You bring back Scooby Williams, Torian York, the linebacker room, Cassius Howell as a defensive end. So much returning production on both sides of the ball. Des Ricks at cornerback. Will Lee at cornerback. The towel incident. So going to be. So much returning production there.
Blanket, but yes.
Blanket, yeah, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, same thing. But so much returning production on both sides of the ball that they have the ability to recruit at a high level in the transfer portal and in the freshman class. Their freshman class was incredible, so that's something to keep an eye on. But I mean, they didn't really have to go all out with the transfers, and when they did and the positions they focused on, they're going to be all high impact players.
3 games left on the schedule here. After they get past Texas A&M, I mean, again, don't know what to expect from any of these teams come when the season starts, but on paper at least, once they get past Texas A&M, then we should have a pretty good idea of how this team season is going to shake out. If they're in contention for the playoffs at all, or I mean, I would assume feel like bowl game is at least the floor. But if they're not gonna, if it's gonna be a close call for them to make a bowl game, we'll know after that Texas A&M game. After playing Texas A&M, they host Mississippi State. So here they have, like you mentioned, at quarterback again, Michael Van Buren played against Missouri last year. Now it's Blake Shapen, who was there at Mississippi State last year, but he started in 4 games and now taken over at starter, presumably. What do you make of this Mississippi State roster, a team that Missouri, just blew out last year?
Uh, correct me if I'm wrong, Joey. Is there an answer to the quarterback battle yet? Is it for sure Blake Shapen, or are they still fighting it out?
Let me look it up again. I believe what I saw, it's Blake Shapen has pretty much taken it.
Gotcha. Well, obviously he's a seasoned veteran. He played at Baylor, so he has some Power 5 experience. But he's not the only quarterback on the roster. They brought in Luke Kromenhoek from Florida State, who I think played. He played a little bit throughout the season. So former 5-star, like I said, he's talented and could fight for a role there. Also brought in 4-star Kamario Taylor, who one of the higher rated players, if not the highest in their class. So they have options at quarterback. If Blake Shapen doesn't work out, I want to say he's been benched a time or two in his career. So Mississippi State had to bring in a ton of transfers, a very deep class. One of my favorite players in the class is Fluff Bothwell, running back from South Alabama. Devon Booth, who was a starting running back last year, is still returning. So I think they're going to have a pretty dynamic 1-2 punch there. A couple other names that caught my eye were Old Dominion safety Jerron Manning, who was a 60 tackle guy last season. He's productive. Brennan Thompson from Oklahoma is one of those guys that was hurt a little bit, but he's making the move and should be. Looks like he could be their lead guy. They brought in a ton of transfer wide receivers. So keep that in mind. The receiving room has a lot of uncertainty. When I say a ton, 6 receivers. Obviously, they lose their top 2 and Kevin Coleman and Mario Craver. So they had to bring in new ones, but it's a completely new receiver room there. And then linebacker Jalen Smith from Tennessee, another productive one. He was a rotational guy, but still managed to end up with 30, 40 tackles for Tennessee last year. So going to be a good player there. North Carolina State defensive end Red Hibbler was a pretty good player last year. I'd imagine he's going to be a starter in some capacity. And then 2 other names that really I think caught my eye were Javen James, offensive tackle from Akron, and I think he was committed to Maryland at one point. But he's a big dude and still has eligibility, so he's going to be a bit more of a developmental guy. And then Kobe Keenum is a former 4-star recruit. He started his career at Kentucky. They don't really have much at center, so he's going to probably be forced into that starting center spot and literally doesn't have a single snap under his belt, I believe, for Kentucky. So going to be interesting to see how that goes. But he, he's a big dude and 4-star recruit, so he has that athletic potential there. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. But they brought in a ton of players. Multiple from Northern Illinois, by the way. So I don't know if there's a pipeline there, but yeah, a ton of players. A lot of them are probably gonna have to play right away. So it'll be interesting to see how some of those guys slot in.
And just an update from what I'm seeing, it looks like Shapen has kind of taken the lead there at quarterback. Moving on to Oklahoma, traveling there on November 22nd. They have back-to-back away games. So I guess, this is a difficult stretch a little bit here to go from to have back-to-back on the road on the SEC. Obviously, Oklahoma brings in, they had one of the first dominoes in the quarterback transfer portal frenzy, getting John Mateer out of Washington State. Really interested to see how Mateer plays in the SEC. He had over 800 rushing yards last year as well. Massive guy at quarterback. So, Michael, how do you think? Oh, well, they also got Jaden Knott. It's important to mention at running back. How do you think that duo will shake out in the SEC and the rest of the guys they added?
They have the power conference technically power conference experience, Washington State. You can call that what it is. but they have high level experience, and John Mateer was probably one of the best quarterbacks in the country last year. I don't want to stretch that too much, but he was one of the better ones. So he knows how to win games and is multifaceted. Like you said, he can run a little bit, but has a good accurate arm as well. So I would imagine he's slated to be one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC. And then Jaden Knott, wasn't surprising to see him transfer. He struggled with injuries last year, and he's been really on NFL radars and people's radars in general since he was a true freshman. That was his best season of his career. So, he's been on multiple radars of many people for a long time, and it's kind of nothing against Cal, but nice to see him take a step up in competition. So nothing stopping them from being one of the better duos in the SEC, kind of like you mentioned. Outside of those two, they brought in some really high impact players that I really liked. But again, another team that did a good job with player retention. They're going to have some younger players playing, presumably in starting roles next year. But the transfers that they did hone in on and the positions that they did target, I think, are going to be productive. Receiver was one of them. Like I mentioned earlier, they really got hit with the injury bug last year. And a couple of those guys left. Actually, like all of their good ones left. Angelo Anthony, Nick Anderson, Brendan Thompson are gone. So that sucks. But they do return Dion Burks, Jaden Gibson, Zion Carney, and Ivan Carrion. So those are productive guys. In the transfer portal, they bring in Giovanni Gibson from Arkansas Pine Bluff, who was a 1,000-yard receiver last year. Very good player. Keontae Lewis from Southern Illinois, Isaiah Satenga from Arkansas, and then Josiah Martin from California. So all of those guys, to some extent have some history of being productive players. And then another interesting guy is Derek Simmons. He's a offensive tackle from Western Carolina. Don't know if he's going to start right away, but he was one of the higher rated players in the transfer portal, one of the higher rated tackles in the transfer portal. So going to be interesting to see if he makes an impact right away. But again, this is a team that returns a lot of players, a lot of talent. A lot of true freshmen started last year due to injuries. Defensive tackle Jaden Jackson was one of them, and I'm pretty sure he had a good game against Missouri. And then cornerback Eli Bowen as well, another guy that started last year who you would imagine is going to start again this year. So, they've got some younger players with experience starting, should be starting this season. I think it'll be interesting to see how those guys mix in with the transfers.
And they do have David Stone coming back after initially entering the transfer portal, as Mizzou Twitter is very familiar with.
Yeah, that sent Twitter into a frenzy, didn't it?
Yes, one of the rare cases of why we have to actually be careful in our reporting when a guy enters the transfer portal, because it doesn't mean he's gonna be gone for sure. But kind of a make or break year for Brent Venables, entering his second year in the SEC. On to Arkansas, their head coach, also a big question for him, and Sam Pittman was surprised that they didn't use all the situations last year as a way to respectfully move on. But he's sticking around another season for Arkansas. They have a good quarterback returning in Taylon Green, who played a good game against Missouri last season. They're losing Andrew Armstrong, their great wide receiver, to the NFL draft. What do you make of what Arkansas did in the portal?
They're replacing Andrew Armstrong with another one of these guys in the all-name team, Omega Blake. Isn't that just awesome? He was a solid guy for Charlotte last year. I think it's going to be more of a split receiver room for Arkansas, but they brought in him and Ismail Cisse. They also added Raylan Sharp, and then former 4-star Missouri wide receiver Courtney Crutchfield, who didn't last too long in Columbia. I guess that's really not all that surprising, based on the players in the room and just how everything was shaping out, and obviously being from Little Rock. So not a bad decision or not a shocking decision at all for him. But outside of that, I'm really not all that blown away by any of the guys they added. I think that some of the defensive players that they added are going to be good ones. Julian Neal, a quarterback from Fresno State, is one that could be good. Caleb Wooden is a safety from Auburn that could be impactful. Jordan Young, a cornerback from Cincinnati, Connie Walker, cornerback from Oklahoma. So they added to their secondary a little bit. One name that I remember reading a lot about was Cam Shanks. He's a receiver from UAB, but was actually one of the higher, production wise and grade wise, one of the better return men in the country last year. So that'll be probably an impactful player for them. But they got a lot of guys. I just really don't know. There's a lot of unproven players on this list, so I don't really know how that's going to work out for them. But they're returning guys like Taylor Green and Braylon Russell at running back will be important. Selman Bridges, true sophomore cornerback, is another guy that I'm trying to keep an eye on. He's a former 4-star. I think he entered the portal at one point and returned. So going to be an important player for them. But this is another one of those teams that maybe didn't change their floor all that much, but I don't know what their ceiling looks like after their transfer portal class and their freshman class.
Well, Mizzou betting odds are set at 7.5 wins on the over-under for the season. We'll see how that shakes out. There's definitely, again, on paper, I hate to really point to teams, say this is going to be an easy match, it's going to be a difficult match. But I would say the stretch in the middle of the season here, South Carolina, UMass breaks it up, but South Carolina, Alabama, Auburn, Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, in the middle of SEC season is certainly not an easy stretch. But in some ways in the SEC, it's never been more difficult to move up. In some ways, it's easier than ever. So exciting season coming up here for Mizzou and the rest of the SEC. Anything to add here, Mike, before we close it out?
No, I think this is going to be a really unpredictable year with the amount of roster turnover, not just with Missouri, but throughout the SEC. And I mentioned this at the very beginning, but the quarterback situations for a lot of teams are very different. You can only point to a few in the conference that have returners and a even more select few of those that are going to be really, have proven themselves already. You look at Nussmeier from LSU, Sellers. If you want to throw Marcel Reed in there, I guess you can. Lagway at Florida. Outside of that, it's pretty unclear. There's still, I guess, not quarterback battles, but some teams that don't have a complete answer. Like even I look at Mississippi State. Blake Shapen might have won the battle in the spring, but is he your starter for the whole season? That sort of thing, barring injuries. So I'm still keeping an eye on that. I think that's going to be the most, interesting thing to keep an eye on throughout the conference. And it is, I think, the quarterback really helps with the ceiling. I'm talking about the ceiling and the floor a lot. I think a quarterback helps a lot with that. So it'll be interesting to see how that is handled with all those teams that don't necessarily have the complete answer to that question at that position.
Well, that's going to round us out for today here on the All Things Mizzou podcast. We'll still have stuff throwing throughout the offseason. If anything, we're entering the exciting part of the offseason. A little bit more to talk about with the SEC spring meetings going on. Once we enter June, we'll be able to say we're 1 month away from being in the month of SEC media days and the start of fall camp and all that. We're going to be starting over on the site with our opponent preview, so we'll be going into even more detail to this podcast that we had today. And then after that, we'll have SEC Media Days in the middle of July, and then after that, we'll take a look at some position previews, and then fall camp will be starting shortly after that. So a lot of exciting stuff on the coming up here, believe it or not. So appreciate you tuning in, and hope you do the same for the rest of our coverage over at Missouri Tigers on SI.